Okay, hi everyone. I am Dr. Jennifer Coker, research scientist at Craig Hospital, and I will be the moderator for this webinar called Meet the Editors, Getting Published in SCI Journals. This webinar is presented by the Asia Early Career Committee, of which I am chair, and is targeted towards early career professionals, students, and trainees. Of course, some of you longtime researchers may learn a tip or two. We have three presenters who I will introduce shortly. Each will give a short presentation, and then after each presentation, after all presentations, we will have an interactive question and answer session. At any time, please put any questions you have in the question and answer box or the chat box, and I will ask the questions during the interactive session, and our fabulous presenters will answer them. Our first presenter will be Dr. Daniel Graves. Let me stop sharing so Dan can share his slides.
Okay.
Dr. Graves is the Vice Chair of Research in the Department of Rehab Medicine at Thomas Jefferson University in Philadelphia. He is the Vice Chair of the International Standards Committee of Asia, and use of the international standards as well as outcome measurements are the focus of his research. Dr. Graves is the editor-in-chief of Spinal Cord and Spinal Cord Cases and Series, the official journals of the International Spinal Cord Society, ISCOS, and he will be giving us some helpful do's and don'ts on getting published in SCI journals.
Okay, I'm about ready. Hang on just 1 second.
This is always the most nerve-wracking part of any virtual presentation, is getting the slides up.
Exactly.
But we can see them. Thank you.
You're seeing the wrong one, though. I can't get it to move. Okay. Let me stop share that real quick. Yeah, we're having technical issues here.
It's a Friday. Zoom is ready for the weekend too.
Well, I think okay. There, I got it now. I'm sorry. We might need to have a little pause here to cut this tape. We're almost there. Oh, there we go. Okay, I'll just skip through the slides that I'm not going to do. Okay.
We've got time.
Okay. All right. Hello, everybody. I'm glad to be here with my distinguished colleagues, and I was hoping to maybe help young scientists and new investigators to find ways to be able to publish in very high impact journals and find the right journal in order to prepare their work. I think the most important thing that that new investigators and new scientists can know is understanding the role and the viewpoint of an editor. And first is that the role of the editor is to be the first reader, in the professional area. But if it's the first reader of the paper, it's going to be bad. So, but remember, you have to get past the editor first before we can get it reviewed. So keep that in mind. That's the role of the editor. And the editors are usually pretty busy people. And we do this to make the science better, to be able to add good, solid, real information in transparent ways to the body of knowledge of spinal cord injury or any other injury. And the viewpoint of the editor is not just getting your magnificent small study or study published. The viewpoint is the life of the article. The life of the article is very important because we want to publish papers that will receive citations. We want to publish papers that will live on in systematic reviews and so on. So when you're considering writing up your paper, not everyone is going to be a great citation generator, but keep that in mind. We need citation generating publications. And the painfully obvious, I'm not going to go through the, you want to avoid the summary rejection. You want to make sure that your papers are accurate and complete, follow some guidelines. And the guidelines is really what I want to talk about. As you can see on the slide that I have up is the Equator Network. And Oxford University promotes this treasure trove of resources.
Dan,
Yes.
we're not seeing your slides.
Oh, you're not?
No.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
That's okay.
One of these days I'll learn how to do this, right? Okay.
There.
Okay.
That's it.
Yeah, so the Equator Network at Oxford University promotes and provides free of charge a huge treasure trove of resources. Now, these resources are really for reporting, which is in writing your papers is going to be very important. And I would like you to think of these guidelines more as tools for preparing articles that are worthy of publication and will live on past the original publication. So you can see that there's a great number of resources available at the Equator Network, and they are for many, many different kinds of studies. I just received a tweet yesterday that Equator Network has now got APA style reporting guidelines that are available for a psychologist. And these resources could be tools for people who are not only planning or writing about or conducting studies, but it gives you a checklist of all of the things that you need to put in a paper or in a study and how to report that so that it is transparent and so that it is available and replicable science in the publications. So that's one area I would like to bring your attention to. For instance, one of my journals reports case studies. And I don't know if you've read many case studies recently, but they vary a great deal in quality. Some of them really need to be refined. Additional information is required, and some information might not necessarily be necessary in a paper. But here you can see that these are suggestions. These are suggestions and things that you need to put in there, and you can report them on the line of your manuscript. And just think how happy a reviewer would be if you had this filled out and you sent it along with your paper. It would aid them a great deal in the reviewing process. And then we would also know that you have at least considered all of these areas. Another resource that I'd like to bring to your attention is the Cosmin Network. The Cosmin Network has got a great deal of information. Their focus is on measurement, however, and they do have a great number of resources for deciding what measures to use. And then when you're writing them up, you have all of these resources that are available, and they give you all the information to evaluate the validity of your study, the risk of bias for your studies. And then before you go to publishing, you can evaluate your own study. These are very important things. And I think most journals are requiring JARS now. I know Spinal Cord and Spinal Cord Cases and Series is going to be requiring a larger number of these for different types of studies. And so those are the things that I'd like to bring to your attention. I think the only other issue that I would tell you about is to select the right journal. Many of the papers that I read are not focused on the content area of the journal. So be sure to read the mission of the journal and the purpose, make sure that you are presenting papers that fit that focus. And that's really the best things that I can say is to look at the journal. Maybe even if there's a question, send a letter, email to the editor and ask if this is something that would be appropriate for them, and interact with the editor and the associate editors that'll be handling the papers, because they're the ones that you're negotiating with. The reviewers provide information to the associate and the editors, and then we can negotiate back and forth. So I think that's about all I have to say now. Any questions?
We'll answer questions at the end. I just want to hit on a couple things. Thank you, Dan. That was very informative. I was taking notes during this, and I definitely put down the Equator Network and the Cosman Network. And I just wanted to make a comment. Your get past the editor first opening statement made me think of the Black Knight from Monty Python, and just keep going. You know, it's just a flesh wound. So sorry, that's my brain. And I also wanted, when you mentioned the Equator Network sent out a tweet, you know, that's a great reminder that social media is a great way to get tips on publishing, because most of the journals have accounts, share helpful information, and especially free articles. And so that'll help you get a sense of what journals you should be submitting to. So thank you very much. Dan, if you could stop sharing. And Suzanne, you can get your slides ready. Our next presenter is Dr. Suzanne Grow, or Groa, as some like to call her. She is a physician scientist, board certified in physical medicine and rehabilitation with a subspecialty certification in SCI medicine. Dr. Grow is the director of SCI research and chief of SCI at MedStar National Rehabilitation Hospital in Washington, D.C. She's currently president-elect of Asia and co-editor-in-chief with Dr. Kathy Zabracki of Topics in SCI Rehabilitation, the official journal of Asia. Dr. Grow will be speaking to us about writing for basic scientists versus clinical researchers. Dr. Grow? You're muted still as well.
Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Excellent. Thanks for the nice intro. So yes, I'm going to spend the next couple of minutes talking about what I was asked to talk about, is writing for basic science versus sort of clinical journals. And I have to say, when I got that, I was kind of like, yikes, because I'm more of a clinician, and you know, I write primarily for you know, I write primarily clinical studies, although I am co-editor-in-chief of Asia's Journal Topics in Spinal Cord Injury Rehabilitation. And I am starting to get into the basic science world with some of my collaborators a little bit. So I kind of went back and forth on how to best answer this question for everyone. And what I decided to do is reach out to some of the brilliant minds that I have access to through our Asia Board of Directors, and also through my role as a member on the scientific review panel for the Craig H. Nielsen Foundation. So I generated a question based on one question for all of the grant reviewers on the panel from the Nielsen Foundation, and also from our board of directors. And I asked them, if you were to pick one important thing that you would recommend for an early career scientist from your perspective, in terms of, you know, getting their science published, what, and or producing your science, what would you recommend to them? And I will tell you that the response was fabulous. I think I got responses from nearly every person on both of those two boards or panels, whatever you want to call them. And so my initial thought was, and when I sent out the original email, what I did is I said, okay, I'm going to make a table, And then I'm going to put all the responses from basic scientists in one column and all the responses from clinicians in another column. And then there's some people who kind of do both. And so I'm going to also have a translational column, which will be sort of what I interpret as translational recommendations, or folks who really are more in the translational space. And you'll see, as I put this together, it was really interesting, and I learned a lot, and I loved the recommendations, but really pretty much all the recommendations are transparent where they came from. The recommendations really span basic science, translational, clinical, science, everything. So I just want to go through them, and I think some of them kind of address some of the questions that people had. So let me go through them. So I am going to read these because I want to talk a little bit about them as I go through them, and there is some repetition between some of them. Sell your work in the title. Lure people in. I will tell you recently as last week, a paper that I'm working with on my collaborators, we must have spent 30 minutes on the title. Because the title is the first thing they see, and you sort of have to make some decisions. Do you want to tease someone with the title, or do you want to give them all the answers in the title? But sell your work and lure people in and convince them to go and read that article, and then lure them in with your lit search and in the introduction, provide an interesting hook that keeps them reading. The next comment, and what you see in my table here, so I said I sort of initially thought I'd separate it into from basic scientists, translational, and clinicians. You can see where I put the quotes. I kind of felt like where the recommendations spanned. But if I put it over to the left, it kind of came from a basic scientist. And I'm going to try to go through this in terms of the layout of a paper. From beginning to end. So the next recommendation was, I'd like to see an introduction that lays out what's known and then what needs to be known next and how this paper is going to fill a gap. And I think that's important, and you'll see this reiterated. You got to state the gap and state what you're going to do new, what this paper adds to the evidence base. So what gap's going to be filled. Be sure that rigor is demonstrated throughout the methods and duly cite the premise of your study. Again, stated a different way from someone with a different background, methods and results should be clear and concise. I actually work with a methodologist who is fabulous in this regard. But if I let her run free, the entire paper would also be the method. So we have to keep it clear. People have to understand what we're doing. It has to be concise. But the other thing is, and this is what I think about when I think about the methods, is if someone wants to repeat my study, they need to know every step that I went through. You'll see this next recommendation again later too, and I really like this one. Clarity and no jargon in describing how the results do and don't fit with what we know, and extend what may impact the field clinically with respect to future research directions. I think that's really important, especially as we really do need to be more translational in our studies and our writing and everything, and understand your readership and how maybe a clinician reader is going to come from a very different background than a basic science reader, and they may not understand the jargon, and that's hard from an authorship standpoint, but it really makes for a better paper overall. Find a good mentor to help write with clarity the audience you are targeting. So there's really kind of two recommendations here. And the mentorship issue came up a couple times from the recommendations I got from the panels. But the second part of the quote or recommendation came up a couple times too. Identify the audience that you're targeting and write for that audience. All right, for the next slide. This is one, so moving our way through the paper, don't interpret your data in the results section. This is actually one of, as an editor and writer and everything, one of my big beefs. The results are for laying out your data. Report it in the results and then interpret it in the discussion. And then a quote that's not on here, which I actually forgot to put my own, is in the discussion, don't reiterate. Or when I'm mentoring people, my favorite word to use is, in the discussion, don't regurgitate your results. Because that's what it is if you repeat it. You're just regurgitating it. The discussion is your place to interpret and your findings in the context of the evidence, but then put it all together into what that means. That's, for me, what makes what I call a magical discussion and a game-changing article. Back to the results. Accept data for what they are and what they represent, and be honest with yourself regarding the story. A lot of times we go into science, and this is the beauty of science in my mind. We go into it with a preconceived notion of what we think is going to happen, and then that doesn't happen. And we might be disappointed. Don't be disappointed. When science doesn't work out like you think it's going to work out, that's where some of the most incredible discoveries are made. So be honest with those results, and they might surprise you. The data and findings should sell themselves and not should be sold or shaped to fit the expectation of the study. Often there's a functional disconnect of writers as the intended, dispassionate, objective hypothesis testers rather than salespeople. And I included, which annoys the hell out of me because that was just getting the point across of this particular panel member. The best subtitle I ever saw for a manuscript was Findings in Search of Meetings. So again, some of the same kind of recommendations stated a different way. Again, find a good mentor to help write with clarity for the audience that you're targeting. Again, this came up several times. And the next quote came up several times too, which I really like. Does your paper answer the question, so what? The reader should have a clear understanding of the clinical and/or research implications of the study's findings. Why are the studies important, and what gaps in knowledge the data address? This is a really common issue I see with early career investigators because you're new in the field, you're excited, you're doing your first study or some of your first studies, and you want to share it with the world. A lot of times those first studies may be a little bit repetitive, but to you, I get it. They're big and they're huge and they're magical, but look at those in the context of the whole evidence and make sure you're not just sharing your findings because they're new to you, but you're sharing your findings because they're new to the field and they add to the field. In discussions, I like to see that the writer has considered all possible interpretations possible and even proposed ways to distinguish those in the future. Again, when I'm mentoring people, I talk about magical discussions. Again, interpret. The two magic words for me in discussions are synthesize and interpret, okay? Not repeat and regurgitate. A key part of the synthesis is to make clear to the reader how the differences in this study relative to prior studies may contribute to differences observed in outcomes. Okay, again, this is for the discussion, and synthesize, and then interpret what this means. Make it clinically relevant. And what you do as the author believe that the information you present in the paper makes a difference in the clinical approach. Okay, again, what does this science add to what's already out there? Try to be specific about what is new and what is confirming in the context of all the prior work. And that's what I talked about a little bit before. Is this work new to you because you're new to spinal cord injury, or is it new to the field? And try to kind of make that differentiation early. Do not cherry pick prior results just to make your data seem novel and exciting, okay? As with seminar speakers, I love it when authors present more alternative interpretations than I can think of while reading the paper or hearing the seminar. That shows me that they're not just looking for data to support a preconceived notion, theory, or model. Rather, they're genuinely interested in determining what it is that Mother Nature is trying to show them, okay? So again, we have different people talking about interpret, interpret, interpret. Present your results, know the evidence base, and then try to figure out what they mean in the context of the evidence. And in that discussion, think out of the box too. So I like discussions that end by clearly explaining how things have moved forward in the thinking about the relevant problem, thanks to the paper that I've just read. And I totally agree with this. I will be interested to see how my co-speakers feel about this. Anyone who writes clearly further work is needed in the field, I want to smack on the back of the head. That is one of my typical recommendations for my mentees is do not write that as your conclusion of the paper. If you take one point away, I guess, from my piece of this talk, don't write that. Good science, this goes for good grant preparation too, is novel, significant, feasible, and interpretable. And again, this came up earlier. Make sure that you envision your audience when you're writing. If it's for basic scientists, then explain, and I think this is a great recommendation, explain what the AIS grade means. If it's for clinicians, then explain why a particular biochemical pathway is implicated in a certain setting. Don't make the reader do more homework because you're going to run the risk of them just putting your paper down. So lastly, be open-minded and don't take feedback personally. I got this next one, actually these next two recommendations several times. Words and language matter. Look at your words, look at your language, know who you're writing for. Getting back to Dan's talk a little bit, maybe choose that art of the journal that you're going to target before you start writing the paper, so then you know your audience, and then tell a story. All right, and with that, I'm going to transition back to the rest of the crew.
Thank you, Suzanne. I love the be open-minded and don't take feedback personally. And it goes back to my Black Knight metaphor. It's just a flesh wound. You'll get past it. I love that you, as an expert, reached out to your resources and contacts. It really emphasizes the importance of networking and mentorship, which are both a focus of what we're trying to do as the Asia Early Career Committee and help our early career investigators get their names out there. I also really appreciate that the tips you gave for writing a paper overlap with writing a grant. You know, the catchy title, you know, get the grant reviewers in early on. But that's something we're figuring out as early career researchers as well. And I also appreciate the comments on presenting results that didn't turn out as expected. We have a question about that that I'll ask later, but my dissertation results were like that. You know, my hypotheses were not supported, and I freaked out for a minute, but then I thought, wait a minute, this is fun to try to justify. And I think I did a good job, but I haven't written that paper yet. So we'll see what the editors think. Okay. So now we are going to go to Dr. Mike Beatty, who is our final presenter. Dr. Beatty is currently professor and director of research at the Brain and Spinal Injury Center in the Wheel, I don't know how to pronounce that, Neuroscience Institute and Department of Neurological Surgery at the University of California at San Francisco. He moved to UCSF from Ohio State, where he was founding chairman of the Department of Neuroscience in the College of Medicine in 2006. He and his wife and colleague, Jacqueline Bresnahan, have worked on the neurobiology of SCI and recovery of function at the preclinical level for many years, moving more recently into clinical research in SCI. Dr. Beatty is the principal investigator of the prospective observational study Transforming Research and Clinical Practice in SCI, TRACK SCI, and is a member of the board of directors of Asia and the Praxis SCI Institute. Dr. Beatty is an academic editor for PLOS One and is on the editorial boards of Neurotrauma Reports and Neuroplasticity. Dr. Beatty?
Thanks, Jen. I'm happy to be here and join these editors. I'm not an editor in chief myself, but I I have a lot of experience with this topic that we're going to talk about, which is journal impact factors and, should you care? So, the topics for discussion I have are, I'm going to tell you a little bit my viewpoint on the target audience, which is really early career investigators. We're going to just give a brief definition of impact factors, like the journal impact factor and the citation, how citations are counted in the H index, and then impact factors in career advancement. This is a big issue in a lot of institutions, and particularly for young investigators. So also spinal cord injury is sort of a niche field. We'll talk about that. And the difference in clinical, translational, basic science, SCI research and impact factors. And then just the discussion part is really, should you chase impact factors and go all out to get into these really high impact journals? Is that worth it? So my background, I've done a lot of mentoring. I was as a department chair and a center director, and was on academic promotions and tenure committees. And interestingly, in graduate program reviews, this issue comes up a lot. For example, the UC system-wide committee noted that many of the UC campuses had neuroscience graduate programs that had tenures of their graduate students up to 8 or 9 years. And a big reason for that was because principal investigators were requiring sort of their graduate students to have like a nature or science paper to get out of, to get a degree. So that was clearly something that was a big issue. I have been on editorial boards and NIH and study sections, and career experience. We have a spouse sharing lab, and so these issues come up, like how do you share credit for papers, et cetera. So these are all things that impact young investigators, and that all involve questions about how do you get your paper into a journal that's going to impress your chairman or your review committee, et cetera. So the citations for each of these for papers are determined by a number of things. There's the thing called the Web of Science, which I'm going to refer to, which has a core journal set, and they count basically all the citations to those journals, and then they use those to rank the journals within fields. So the journal citation reports, which ranks all the different journals in, say, neuroscience or clinical medicine or whatever, produces a journal impact factor, which for each year is the total number of citations in the previous 2 years divided by the total number of articles that journal has produced. So, for example, if a journal has 10 articles per year and there are 10 total citations, and they have a journal impact factor of 1. These range, if you look, it's kind of an interesting thing to go into this journal citation reports and just look and see what the impact factors are for different journals. They range from less than 1 to actually greater than 90. So there's a huge range, and the question is, again, do you want to be in one of those top 50 or top 20 or 30 journals, or is your specialty article more appropriate for a specialty journal that normally has a lesser impact factor? Another thing that's used for trying to understand the productivity of individual investigators in a review is the H index, which is the number of papers that a person has that matches or exceeds the same number of citations. So there's a graph over here that sort of suggests that shows this process. This is on the y-axis is the number of citations, and this person has 7 papers that have more than 7 citations. So that means that their H index is 7. So it's kind of a way of sort of collapsing the impact across multiple papers and just sort of seeing what the overall impact of that person is. Now, of course, one of the issues is that applies to every author on the paper. So it's kind of complicated to understand what that really means. So again, the highly cited papers vary across disciplines, but some papers, have many thousands of citations over their lifetime, and others have very few. And the reasons for that are very, are complex as well. So do impact factors have a role in academic review? And this is just a recent paper from eLife that surveyed a lot of the both research intensive and like master's level institutions in Canada and the United States, and found that 40% of these the documents that are generated for review committees specifically mention high impact journals. And the kind of things that they look at are like impact factor. These are things that were actually mentioned in these documents. Impact factor, impact score, high impact journal, journal's impact, top tier journal, recognized journal, prestigious journal, highly regarded journal, highly ranked journal, significant journal, all those things. And so what does that really mean? I mean, it depends on what field you're in and what kind of journals that your peers normally publish in. So many academic institutions use both journal impact factors and faculty metrics as faculty citations as metrics for performance. And why do they do that? It's easy, it's convenient. They can be compared across disciplines and across departments. Individualized metrics, though, like citations for individual papers or the H index, take a long time to acquire. So if you're going through a 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 year review process, it's hard for junior investigators to build up all those numbers. So chair people and heads of P&T committees sometimes just say, okay, but the good thing to do is just look at their journal impact factors of the journals that they've submitted to and got accepted to, and that predicts potentially their real productivity in the long term. I think a lot of people would argue that that's not a good idea, and yet you're really faced with that every time you come up for promotion or tenure if you're in a tenure granting institution. Another thing that I think I should mention is a lot of people really consider spinal cord injury to be sort of a niche discipline. I mean, if you're in biochemistry and you study major biochemical pathways and you have some huge new genetic marker for for an important metabolic pathway, then you have relevance to multiple scientific disciplines. If you're studying spinal cord injury as a clinical entity, the people that care about that are mostly people that study spinal cord injury, and spinal cord injury is a relatively small medical entity in terms of the number of patients and the amount of medical information, et cetera, that goes into it. So is it really fair to expect somebody who's working in clinical science, spinal cord injury, to have an impact, to publish in Science or Nature, where these things are really much more globally oriented? But most spinal cord, and actually there are a lot of spinal cord injury papers that do appear in Nature and Science, maybe not a lot, but enough. And I'd be happy to talk about those if people want to. They tend to be those articles that cross over to other disciplines as well. And most spinal cord injury papers appear in subspecialty journals like the Journal of Neurotrauma, Spinal Cord Neurorehabilitation, that just have lower journal impact factors because of their smaller readership. So the other thing, though, is that individual spinal cord injury papers in lower tier journals, and I use that in quotes, can really be highly cited. So it's all of these measures are really kind of difficult to interpret. So the other thing is that clinical and translational basic science research might have different impact factor profiles. So despite being a niche medical field, spinal cord injury received a lot of attention in the public sphere. Christopher Reeve, all kinds of, it's very dramatic, to have the potential of having a person who can't walk again, or to have a major impact on a really devastating disease like spinal cord injury. So these high impact journals do have an interest in this, and they like to look for spinal cord injury articles that suggest that there may be a big breakthrough coming through. And that is part of the problem of trying to write papers for these, but not to overemphasize the importance of your data. So in preclinical models, dramatic results can gain attention, especially if they're linked to basic biomechanisms, for example. In translation and clinical studies, big successes are rare, so the apparent impact may be difficult to achieve. And also clinical studies often have many, many authors, which means if you do get into a high impact journal, you're sharing the credit with a large number of people. So should young investigators in spinal cord injury chase impact factors, like try to get their papers in Science and Nature? The yes side is it's really hard to deny that publications in high impact journals get a lot of attention and they can be career accelerators. In addition, the results in a high impact journal are more likely to be pursued as therapies by industry and people that are going to actually take your findings and move them into the clinic. So that's a positive reason. No answer would be focusing on the currently popular or the exciting, can detract really from more clinically meaningful results and can have impact on people that you are working with now, especially if you're a clinician working with patients. And the time taken to shop for high impact journals acceptance detracts from productivity. That's something we might not want to discuss. It really takes a lot of time and effort to push that from a lower impact journal to a higher impact journal, and is it really worth it? So, I think ideally, in answering this question, the goal for Asia members and scientists in general is to use the highest quality science to advance treatments and opportunities for people with spinal cord injury in our case. Also, we want to support, spinal cord injury specialty journals because they provide a really important outlet for really clinically relevant papers that will affect our patients. Individual strategies, though, can take account of the local advancement expectations while keeping this goal, hopefully. And you can do that through good mentors and trying to get as much information as you can from your review committees, and also provide sort of an individual context for your most important accomplishments, rather than just listing your citation factors or whatever. Try to put your work in the context of your niche field with spinal cord injury and how important that is potentially for helping people with spinal cord injury. The other thing is that collaboration can provide opportunities to share in really high impact clinical and scientific advances that can boost careers and attain your goals. Collaboration is a two-way street, but I think certainly in these days, the way to really have a bigger impact, not just to get an impact factor score or to get promoted, but to actually do something that will be useful for the field is to get good collaborators and share in the scientific enterprise. So thanks for your attention. I'll be happy to answer questions and discussion whenever that comes about. Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Bader. Beatty, that was fantastic. Every time I had a question, you answered it in the next slide. I had no idea how H-index was calculated, so thank you for that simple explanation. I had two more comments. Your note about dramatic results gaining attention kind of reiterates Dr. Groh's comment about the need for a sexy title. Like, maybe your results aren't as dramatic, but if your title is great, you're going to draw people in. And then you reiterated the consistent theme that Dr. Graves and Dr. Groh have mentioned about the need for networking and mentorship in all of this. So we have a lot of questions. We have 14 minutes left, so we'll try to get through all of the questions. And I will go in order that they were received. So we have a question, and anybody jump in, anybody on the panel, feel free to jump in and answer. Are the SCI papers in the big name journals such as Nature, New England Journal, Medicine, Science, et cetera, largely preclinical?
Maybe I can take that one. Yeah, I think the answer is yes. If you look at the most cited spinal cord injury, if you just put into this Web of Science spinal cord injury and you see a list of papers, there's about 79,000 papers in the last 25 years or so, and the top ones in clinical are, for example, methylprednisolone trial, which was in New England Journal of Medicine. So that's a clinical paper that has a couple thousand citations. Many of the more recent articles that have come out in Nature, I just mentioned like Gregoire Quartine's group, for example, just had several. These are translational papers that sort of mix both clinical and preclinical. I mean, this novel stimulation strategies with actually some clinical data. Those are the really highest impact ones. But then regeneration has been a real theme in neuroscience for years, and spinal cord injury paradigms provide a great way to try to understand, things that produce regeneration, which not much does work in that space. But when you have even a hint of really regenerative spinal cord injuries paradigms, you can get published oftentimes. And I'll stop there, but I just want to say that's where some of these findings can be overstated and can, I think, really produce some issues of raising hopes that are that later to be dashed by later work. So it's a really complicated issue.
Which leads to the question of how can we as SCI researchers publishing in the field prevent that kind of mistranslation of research results in the general media. There is the example of the study that's chocolate cures cancer, and that's not quite what that study found. But do you have any suggestions on how we can write our papers to?
Yeah, I can maybe help out with that one. Another resource that I'd like to bring to the attention of folks is the Berkeley Institute for Transparency of Research. And this is really what I think Dr. Beatty was speaking about, is being transparent in the reporting so that people can evaluate it no matter what your conclusions are. They would be able to evaluate it more objectively by using some of the resources that are available at I think it is bitss.org. There's a great deal of information there on the transparency. And I'm just going to take this liberty. One more thing that really gets under my skin is when participants are referred to as inanimate objects. I really hate people writing that there were 38 cords used in this study. Don't do that. These are human beings. We need to remember that the reason that we're doing this science is to make their lives better. So let them remain human. Thanks. That's just my soapbox. Sorry.
Oh no, sure. And it always surprises me when I see that. Mm-hmm. Next question: at what point do you recommend emailing the journal to ask if they would be interested in your paper? So before you start writing it, to kind of drive how you write and obviously format the paper, or once the paper's finished?
I can jump in and try that. I encourage people to do that liberally. Sometimes, especially with the spinal cord injury specialty journals, you'll have a good feel for, the journals are a little bit different, but you may have a good feel for the paper. I think it's when we start branching out a little more, at least that's been my experience, where probably a couple of things are going on. Like, I don't know quite as much about the journal and what they're interested in. And as we've heard from all the speakers, I mean, spinal cord injury is a bit of a niche field. So especially if you're going outside of the spinal cord injury journal's realm, I don't think there's anything wrong with reaching out to the editor. What can happen? You'll start a conversation with them and you may actually learn some. So I would say do it liberally.
Yeah. They're not really going to smack you in the back of the head if you reach out to them.
Well, we might. One more thing is I concur. You should actually interact with the editors and associate editors freely. I agree with Dr. Grove.
So along those same lines, how long should I wait before I start pestering the editor of a journal about my submission?
I'll take that one. Forever. No. No, I think the peer review process is very challenging. I don't know about what other editors do, but I spend a great deal of time trying to find reviewers that are appropriate for the paper. And this can take a long time depending on the subject of the paper. And the peer review process is extended sometimes by things outside of our control. For instance, COVID. All of the physicians are slammed right now. So, you know, you might need to be a little more forgiving of us, me in particular. I think, you know, many of the peer review process things, you can just simply say, I'd like to inquire about this, and don't say, well, it's been 47 days and, you know, I'm kind of grumpy. Just it's a collegial environment, and interacting with the editor should be friendly, as all I'm saying. So
I think that's one of the benefits of SCI being such a niche field, is that we all kind of know each other. I'm on the editorial board of Topics. Probably should have mentioned that early on. And I know I completely spaced. I got a request to review a paper, and then a reminder, and then a reminder, and then finally, you're no longer needed. And I'm so sorry, Suzanne. So, you know, everybody's busy right now, whether you're a physician, researcher, you know, we've all got a lot going on. So definitely finding, and I think all authors should appreciate the work that the editor puts into finding the right reviewers, because you want to get a good review of your paper and not, you know, somebody that doesn't know the topic. Suzanne, Mike, did y'all have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I actually do. And Dan, I agree with everything you said. What might be helpful too to the listeners is, in addition to what you said, I mean, you know, putting together what Dan said at the beginning of his talk and his answer right here. So what happens when you submit an article? So we then get an email as an editor, hey, a new article has been submitted. And then, as Dan said earlier, as an editor, we make an initial pass through or read through the article. So it has to go through that pass, and we want to do it, you know, very conscientiously as well. So it gets one read through there. And then we determine if the article is suitable to send out for review. Then we have to look for reviewers. Then we send it out to reviewers. We give reviewers, and this is going to vary by the journal. I don't know what some journals are. I mean, I suspect that the amount of time a journal says, depending on the journal, will probably vary from, we need a response within a couple days, probably more so at like a +1, to a couple weeks. And then someone's on vacation, and then we don't hear a response. And then we hear a response 2 weeks later, and that person can't review. So then we have to reach out and find another reviewer. And then on top of that, and this varies by journal, how many reviewers is going to look at that article? It could be as few as 2, it could be up to 4 or so. And then we have to wait for the reviews. Typically for the spinal cord injury journals, and I think rehab journals broadly, in my experience being a reviewer, you're given 2 weeks to review. But I will tell you, as an editor, if someone tells me they can review, but they need another week or 2, I'm like, yes, that's good, because I've identified you as a good reviewer. And, you know, so I have someone who's going to do this conscientiously. So you can see how this gets stretched out and stretched out and stretched out. I don't know if this is right or wrong, and I'd kind of be curious in what my other speakers say. This is my rule of thumb when one of my mentees asks me this question. I say, give them 3 months. Put this article, the submission date, you know, put it on your to-do list 3 months down the road. If you haven't heard anything, just send a very pleasant email to the editor and say, I'm inquiring. Now, I will also say that, and I think this is rare, but I have experienced, and I have experienced it recently, every once in a while, you run into a journal where maybe the editor's not paying really close attention. So I think that kind of prompting is needed sometimes. And it's okay to do that. It's actually better than okay. It's good to do that. Open the line of communication with the editor.
Great, thank you. Related, will being a reviewer for a journal improve my writing? If yes, how do I become involved as a reviewer?
I'll just start, and I know I was long-winded last time. In my opinion, absolutely. And very briefly, it just allows you to see a wide range of articles. And the evaluation process is just so important for learning. So absolutely, yes. And how do I become one? It's the same answer. You reach out to the journal, you reach out to the editor, and you find out what their policy is for editorial board members.
Yeah.
Right.
I can jump in here. Absolutely, I agree with everything that Dr. Gross said. My addition to what she said is that there are actually resources available to teach you how to be a peer reviewer, because I think Dr. Groh would agree with me that the quality of the reviews, even from noted scientists, varies greatly. Sometimes I get a one sentence review. I usually don't use them again as a reviewer. But also, I think it is the policy at Spinal Cord and Cases in Series that if you are a co-author on a paper, you are entered into the database for potential reviewers. So that is, you are in this large pool, and they would only have the information on that one manuscript for you. But, you know, that would be one thing. Any journal that you have been published in, you should be considered an eligible reviewer. So yes, I would suggest everybody here send me an email, ask me for papers to review. I'll give you 5 or 6, you know, it's okay with me. Okay.
One of our activities is with the Asia Early Career Committee is we are working with Dr. Groh and Dr. Zabracki on a mentored reviewer program. So more to come on that, but keep your eyes open. We are at 11 o'clock, but I've been told we can go a little over if Dr. Groh, Dr. Beatty, and Dr. Graves, you're still available. There are a couple more questions. Okay, great. Thank y'all so much. Let's see. How effective or ineffective are appeal letters? This will probably be an it depends answer, but are you going to anger an editor, or will they appreciate an appeal letter? I guess this is if a manuscript is rejected.
I can jump in there too. I am not offended if an author feels that the decision, usually a rejection, is not necessarily the right decision. We have a formal process. I had this actually occur to me 2 days after I took over being the editor of Spinal Cord. I rejected a paper, and we had this issue. But once I established contact with the author, we discussed the points the reviewer had made. We discussed what revisions would be necessary for the paper to get published. He agreed that, you know, maybe this isn't the best journal for him. And so it was resolved very amicably. But I don't think you should worry about angering an editor or an assistant editor. If you feel strongly that your results are appropriate for the journal and that they are, you know, appropriate for the readership. So, you know, we do have formal processes for appeal. In the records that I have seen, appeals are very rarely effective because the peer review is such a strong process. So I would say consider it and be wise.
Along the same lines, does asking for a revision extension factor into the decision?
No.
Good. So ask for extra time if you need it. This question might be great for Dr. Beatty. If I work in a big lab, how do I ensure I get authorship?
Yeah, that's really an important question. So just for an example, we now have a big clinical research group, and there's about 30 people, from anesthesiology all the way to neurosurgery and data scientists and stuff. And we sort of have a policy that everybody who has an active role in the paper, gets on the paper. And the problem is where in the author list do they come? So the way you can ensure that is to start talking about it when you first start the study. And if you get involved in a big research group, which again is a great way to get on a high impact journal if you've got all these people to help you, but you need to understand what the policies are and have a leader, a principal investigator or the center director or whatever to know, let you know that you're going to get credit for what you are doing.
Okay, great. And last question, which is better for an exposure as an early career investigator, presenting at conferences or publishing, or both?
I just think that if you're on a P&T committee, there's nothing like a publication to verify that this person has gone through peer review and has an important contribution to make, and that has something out there that's going to be there for a long time. One of the things that people who are reviewing you for promotion, et cetera, want to know is that you're going to enhance the reputation of their department or their institution. And while you might give a great talk, and that's important, there's only 100 people there that are listening, whereas the journal has a lifetime. So,
I was going to say the same thing. A journal article is enduring. And think about it, and as Mike said, it's been through peer review. The whole journal, the entire article has been through review. For a presentation, your abstract's been through review. So it's a very different process. And also remember this, because we haven't talked about it. When you submit an article for potential publication, really think of it like the peer reviewers' efforts are really trying to make that article better. And I can't really think of an article that I've ever submitted that has eventually got accepted was worse, because the peer review is always better. Okay, so there's much more of a process, and it's enduring with the paper.
Yeah, I agree with my esteemed colleagues, but I would also add that the way I've looked at this in my career is that presentations and talks are to advertise the work that you've done. Really, hopefully it will either be in print soon after your presentation or before your publication sometimes, or your presentation. So, it's really kind of important to have the talk your stuff up and talk your work up a little bit.
Great, thank you. And do you as editors recommend, say I present a paper at Asia or I present a paper at ISCOS, is there do you get bonus points for submitting to topics or spinal cord for a paper that was presented at a conference?
I don't know of any way that it would benefit you other than the fact that you would have probably had some feedback. And along this line, I want to just mention the use of preprint servers. I think this is a great idea for young investigators. Get your work out in front of people who are, interested in your work. And the papers that I have seen that were previously published on preprint servers, I feel are much stronger because they have had that informal peer review, and then you submit it to a peer review. Now, not everything that goes on a preprint server is going to make it, but I think it's a good exercise. Mm-hmm.
I would agree. And I will say one of a colleague of mine who has mentored so many neuroscientists, Barbara Bregman. And I respect her highly. We were working together recently, and in her mentoring activities, I heard her say, she wants, not quite requires, but it sounds like it's a very strong recommendation, people to write the paper first. The presentation isn't your practice for writing the paper. Write the paper, and then kind of like Dan said, and then that presentation is kind of the culmination and the sales.
Definitely makes putting the presentation together much easier if you have the paper written too.
Yes.
We have one last question that's relevant to what we were talking about. Are there any active preprint servers for clinical SCI research?
Yes.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Well, either BioRIX or BioArchive or MedArchive. And I would just say, if you're putting in a grant proposal and you're young and you haven't quite got the time to get that high impact paper, if it's a great paper, put it up there, and that way the reviewers can actually see it, and it counts as it might not count as a peer reviewed publication, but they could have access to it if they want to. So.
Well,
that's a great suggestion.
There is a DLI number when you publish on a
right,
a preprint server.
Yep.
So that's very important. Yeah.
Okay, well, that is all the questions I have. This recording will be available on the Asia website. I'd like to thank our presenters very much. This has been, really great information. I've learned a lot. Hopefully our listeners have learned a lot, and look out for an onslaught of emails from people who want to review for you, hopefully. And again, thank you very much, and have a great rest of your day.